over at BangTheBook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Tons of prop betting articles over there for the Super Bowl. Look around, check all those out. Different ways to bet it, different approaches, player props, game, team, novelty, cross-sport, MVP, all that good stuff over there for you to peruse. So make sure you check that out. Plus, we're still covering college basketball, the NHL, the NBA, esports, soccer, tennis, golf, UFC, you name it, we got it over at BangTheBook.com. Finally, as you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio, presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB and the number 200 is that promo code. 100% deposit match bonus for the Sportsbook, 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. Two guests on the program here today, and we start with Greg Peterson of VSIN and the Hoopin' with Hoops podcast at @GUnit_81 on Twitter. Greg, how's it going today, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Always good to get you on the program here, man. And you know what? Let's go ahead and start with the big game. We might as well. Super Bowl 54 on Sunday night. Side and total have virtually not moved at all since this line was initially posted, and we got all that over money that came in on the game. Still Kansas City -1, -1.5. Still 54, 54.5 for the total. You surprised we haven't seen any movement on the side or total here, Greg?
Not really. I know that there are a couple places in which a total has gotten to 55, but really past that, we haven't seen a whole heck of a lot. And I think that it's very fitting because both these teams do an incredibly solid job of just being able to do what they do best. With the San Francisco 49ers, this is a team that they're going to be looking to run the ball with Mostert. They're not going to be looking to air it out 30 times. And with the Kansas City Chiefs, they've got Patrick Mahomes, and Patrick Mahomes is one of the greatest showstoppers that we've seen in quite a while in the NFL. So I think that this is very appropriate. If you like a little bit more of your ground and pound style, you're probably going to be looking at the 49ers and the under. If you like the Chiefs, you're probably going to be looking at the over in this spot. So I really think that it's a little bit correlated as to the side and the total, unlike a lot of Super Bowls.
Yeah, and of course, you know, we see Kansas City is the public side, the over is the public side, and we're kind of getting the implication here that maybe San Francisco, the sharper of the two sides, maybe some sharp money waiting to take the under on this game. So I do agree. It does seem like there is that correlation. And, you know, something very interesting. You mentioned this to me before the show that you're actually covering the Super Bowl on VSiN in the state of Iowa, where the line is going to look very, very different on Kansas City. And I think this is really interesting. And I think you're a perfect person to ask this because, you know, VSiN is a nationwide network there on SiriusXM. This is the first Super Bowl where we've got 20 states with legalized sports betting. So this line looks different in various parts throughout the country. And I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see what you find out there in Iowa covering the game.
I totally agree with you. Now, I don't know what the line is right now because I'm going to be going to Catfish Bend, which is based out there in Burlington, Iowa. So I'm actually going to be betting the side because I personally like the San Francisco 49ers on the money line. I have to think out there in Iowa that they're betting the Kansas City Chiefs. I would be very stunned if I'm seeing a worse number on the San Francisco 49ers out there in Iowa than I'm seeing right now in Las Vegas. Because right now in Las Vegas, as I was doing the show Betting Across America on Thursday, we were seeing this line go from 1.5 and then it went back down to 1 before I got off the air. So we are seeing this just really be a little bit of a nip and tuck 1 and 1.5 line. I could probably see it getting to a little bit of 2. We've seen a couple places go to 2 on this game, but I have to think out there in Iowa, we're probably going to see a little bit of a different number than you are, say, in Las Vegas, say, Atlantic City, where it's a little bit more neutral, where you don't have as much influence of the favorite teams.
Well, and I think that's going to be a really fascinating thing to look at in future Super Bowls here. I mean, obviously, California doesn't have sports betting. We know that the number is a little bit cheaper on Kansas City up in Reno than it is in Las Vegas with some of that San Francisco influence. But just imagine, you know, if we get an East Coast team or if we get, you know, 2 states that have legalized sports betting and their teams are going up against each other in the Super Bowl in the future. I mean, it's going to be very intriguing to see what those lines look like in the different parts of the country. And, you know, I'm happy that we get a little bit of a look at that here in this Super Bowl, but some of the regional biases here in the future could be really, really fascinating to follow.
I totally agree with you. And I'm someone that I've really never had the chance to be able to put down a bet outside of Las Vegas because in my time since I have moved from place to place with regards to all of my sports betting and gambling influence and everything like that, the only places I've really been to are the state of California, which obviously you don't have legal sports betting there. I've also visited my home state of Wisconsin once. They are very, very far behind. And then out here in Las Vegas. So I am going to be very interested to see just how things operate in Iowa in general, because I feel like there aren't a lot of people that get the sense of what books are like from state to state, how they all operate. And I'm just really intrigued to see how it all works in general, because being a Las Vegas guy, I think that there are so many things that I find standard that maybe other states do not. And maybe there's something out there in Iowa that Las Vegas could adapt themselves, because we're seeing it out in Atlantic City, the fact that apps have been so good and we're seeing a lot more player props and live betting opportunities than you're seeing out here in Las Vegas as well. So I do think that this is just good for sports betting in general. And for me, it's going to give me a little bit of a new look at things as well. So I'm just very excited about the trip in general.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Catfish Bend is a points bet sports book, right?
Yes, it is.
So, I mean, are you going to, everyone knows that you play every side in total as far as college basketball goes. Are you just making your plays there at Catfish Bend?
It's going to have to depend. I do some offshore stuff as well. I'm going to need to take a look at the menu, because what I'm really curious to find is whether or not PointsBet offers the extra games as well, because that is going to be a key with Monday. We're not going to have a whole lot of mainstream college basketball games. We're going to be taking a look at the extra games a whole lot more. So that's what I'm going to be finding out pretty much in the next 24 hours, because as I am doing this podcast with you, I found out about this trip about 90 minutes ago. Well, not even kidding.
Well, and it's not like you're a busy guy or anything either.
No, not at all.
Especially during this
so
time.
It's gonna, yeah, so it's all whirling. It's going to be terrific. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, and then I'm also kind of intrigued. I mean, obviously the Super Bowl is an animal unto itself, but the differences in college basketball lines, from state to state. I mean, obviously in Iowa, you're going to pay a premium on teams like Iowa, like Iowa State. Maybe certain Big Ten teams get bet.
Like the Chicago-based teams, your Illinois, your like UICs, because what a lot of people don't know is that a lot of these mid-major schools like the Missouri Valley, the Horizon League, a lot of these are just based out there in the Midwest. So I'm going to be curious to see what a line on like Valparaiso versus Illinois State or something like that is going to be, because I have to think that it's going to be a little bit different than what we see in the global market and what we see out here in Vegas.
Well, I'm definitely going to be interested to hear what you have to say about that here this weekend on VSIN, and then also next week when we reconvene here on Bang the Book Radio. But to circle back to the Super Bowl here for a minute, props. Obviously that's really the preferred way to bet this game, because it's a much higher variance environment, a lot more opportunities, a lot more ways of attacking the game. What are some of the props that you've locked in here for the Super Bowl?
All right. You've heard so many of the props with like rushing yards that Mostert is going to get, passing touchdowns for Jimmy Garoppolo, things like that. Well, good gosh darn it, kickers are people too. And I've got shortest punt of under 36.5 yards by Mitch Wishnowsky. The reason why is because he's had just 2 touchbacks so far this year, and Robbie Gould, 0 of 4 on field goal attempts more than 50 yards. What this means is that if the ball finds itself on the 34, 35-yard line, it's a little bit more likely that the 49ers are going to elect to punt. So that means that the range is a little bit shorter than what you're going to see with a bunch of punters. And this is a Kansas City Chiefs defense that I feel like is a little bit more bend but don't break. Now, they certainly broke in the playoffs. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But prior to the postseason, I believe that they had given up 21 points or fewer in 6 out of their last 7 games. So this is a bunch I think is going to be able to rise up. You've got a little bit more of a running team with the 49ers. Won't be surprised if they're punting from like the 40, 41-yard line. And with Wishnowsky not really doing a lot of touchbacks, he typically leaves the ball a little bit shorter. I think that there's some good value here with under 36.5 yards on his shortest punt.
I like this one too, especially because, certainly if it goes into Garoppolo's hands on a 3rd and long, you don't necessarily love the chances of that. So, could open up some more punting opportunities for San Francisco and Wishnowsky there. You mentioned kickers. Sounds like you're kind of looking at special teams props here. Any other ones regarding the kickers or punters that you're looking at?
Will both teams make a 33-yard field goal? This was even money at the Westgate, and I took the yes. Both these kickers have been terrific. A combined one missed field goal between Butker and Robbie Gould ever since Thanksgiving. So both these guys are pretty sure-handed. Well, I mentioned that Robbie Gould is 0 of 4 on field goals that are 50 yards or longer. Inside of 50, he's been pretty automatic. And once again, with Jimmy Garoppolo, if he finds himself in like a 3rd and 10 situation, he's probably not going to be able to complete the ball. And this is a 49ers defense that they do a great job with their pass rush. So say that Patrick Mahomes has the ball at the 20-yard line. He tries to create something. That 49ers pass rush could get a little bit of sack, could be able to bottle him up. That'll lead to maybe something like a 40-yard field goal. So I do think that we've got some good value here. I think that both these teams are going to be settling for a few field goals.
Yeah, I like this one too. This is one I actually traditionally play kind of year in and year out because, a lot of these teams, and in particular these two teams, they're not great in the red zone. A lot of these teams spread it out, and when things get condensed, they kind of have some problems getting 6, have to settle for 3. And these two teams, Kansas City was 20th, San Francisco 21st in red zone touchdown percentage. So I do like that one. It's one I traditionally play. I haven't played it yet, but I do like that. And also, too, I think only 4 combined missed extra points for these two guys. And as we know, an extra point now, essentially in that 35-yard field goal range. So these guys have been pretty automatic from that distance. I do like that one quite a bit. Any other ones before we transition over to basketball?
I know that we've been hitting on quite a few of them. I do think that it's going to be interesting to see what the number is when I get to Catfish Ben. On Jimmy Garoppolo passing yards, I'm going to be looking to the under on that as well, but I want to see exactly what the number is before I wind up locking in on that one. And I want to see their props in general because I do think that there's going to be a lot of value on a lot of those 49er props. So I've been holding off on quite a few of those because I was actually planning on locking in a lot of my props here in Vegas over the next 24 hours. But with this trip popping up, I think I'm going to be firing in on a lot of them at PointsBet.
No, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And again, it will be very interesting to see, what the discrepancies are and sort of compare and contrast what you've got in Vegas versus what you've got there in Iowa. So let's transition over to the college basketball side of things here for the rest of the segment, Greg. And let's talk about the Ivy League because the Ivy League is arguably the most unique conference in college basketball simply because they play these Friday, Saturday back-to-backs. Now, obviously, you go to an Ivy League school, the coursework much harder there than it is at a lot of universities and colleges around the country. So they let those guys do their stuff during the week. They play the back-to-backs on Friday and Saturday. And we've had sporadic conference games in the Ivy, but not a whole lot of these back-to-back situations. How do you handicap those? Because, they're used to it, but at the same time, it takes a toll to play one day, then turn around and play the next.
Yeah, it becomes typically an underfest on Saturday. On Friday, these guys are very fresh. They typically haven't played in a week, so they have a lot of time to be able to ramp up. And then on Saturday, it's a little bit more hodgepodgey, and I find that underdogs have a little bit more of an advantage because with having to play these back-to-backs, these teams that are favored, they're able to prepare for their opponent. Like, it's going to be Columbia versus Yale on Friday. Yale has a lot of time to be able to prepare for Columbia, but in their next game, they're not going to have as much time to prepare because, well, it's the next afternoon/evening. So it is one of these situations in which I think it really levels the playing field. And then you get good old tired legs as well because with these teams that hit the road, they have to go from one place to the other and then play the next day as well. Now, it's not like the Ivy League. You're having to travel from, like, say, the state of Texas over to the state of Connecticut like you have to do for the American Conference or anything like that. But travel is still travel. And I do think that leads to a lot of dogs and a lot of unders on these Saturdays.
Yeah, and the thing about it, too, is that, you've got your teams that are really good in this conference, and then sometimes it feels like a lot of the other teams are kind of interchangeable. So you'll get overtime games. You'll get double overtime games. Then you got to turn around and play the next day. And, obviously the books are trying to do what they can to put these lines up, but on Saturdays, and obviously this, there's upwards of 140 games, and they're not too worried about these Ivy League back-to-backs. So seems like a conference where you can extract some pretty decent value.
Yep, and typically what you're going to find with these Ivy League games is that the games for Saturday, they're not going to be up on the board until the morning. Bookmakers always want to make sure that someone doesn't get hurt because if you have like the star player Chris Knight, say, of Dartmouth, and he winds up getting hurt in the game, then you're obviously putting yourself in a very bad spot. That line will get pounded immediately. And it's not easy to get injury information with regards to Ivy League schools as well. You would have to be watching the game live. So bookmakers protect themselves. They typically put up these lines in the morning. So you do find that. And typically when you get lines that get posted in the AM, it is the wild, wild west, my friend. These lines are going to move, and they are going to move quickly within minutes. So just do yourself a favor. Typically, these lines come out offshore right around, if you're on the East Coast, 7:30, 8 o'clock-ish. If you're on the West Coast, unfortunately, if you're looking to bet these Ivy League games and you're looking to get the best number offshore, you're going to have to set your alarm clock very early. But with that said, it is one of these situations in which even if you get to the party a little bit late, you're still probably going to find a lot of value on these unders.
All right, so I want to look at a few games here for Saturday. One of them is a marquee type of game. The other two are pretty under the radar as far as I'm concerned, but we love to talk about those under the radar games here on Bang the Book Radio. But this Michigan State and Wisconsin game is really intriguing to me because Wisconsin, I don't want to say that it's turmoil, but, Kobe King leaves the program. Brad Davison now suspended. How do you sort of account for that? Because I know you put together your own personal numbers for every game and then bet off of those. What do those two losses do to a team like Wisconsin here in the short term and also the long term?
It means that Wisconsin is going to be using a whole lot of Demetric Trice, and that is going to put this team in a really tough spot. Now, getting Micah Potter helped out this team's power ranking going into Big Ten play. So obviously it's not hurt as bad as, say, if this happened in November. But with that said, when you lose not one, but two players in the backcourt, that's big because typically a team, with regards to their depth, they're able to overcome one loss. But when you have compounded losses, and I think that you'd feel the same way because I know that you do a lot of baseball as well, when you get multiple losses, that's when it really is affecting a team. Now, it's not like Kobe King was going to be going out there and getting 30 points on a nightly basis for Wisconsin. Brad Davison, I will say heart and soul guy because we all remember the 6 charges that he took against NC State. And I, ironically enough, was watching the Iowa versus Wisconsin game with my girlfriend when they wind up losing that game on Monday. She asked, is this normal of Wisconsin basketball as they allowed a 23-5 run to end the game? I said, I can't give you a much more accurate depiction of Wisconsin sports in general than this. And this is going to be a spot in which I think that Wisconsin's really up against it. Typically, you have the fallen man theory if it's one player being out, but with two, this is one in which you've got to be adjusting the Badgers by probably at least 4 points because it's multiple guys. Now you're really having to dive deep into the bench. You might be seeing a walk-on, perhaps getting some time, or else you're going with a very, very short slate as well. But I will say this, they're probably also going to be slowing the game down even more than they already have because that's just Wisconsin basketball. They're going to look to play as ugly as possible with not having a lot of guard play.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. People think about the loss of scoring or something like that, but a lot of times injuries, suspensions, so on and so forth affect the team's tempo, and they will definitely try to slow this game down here against Michigan State, you would think. You mentioned maybe a 4-point or so adjustment here for Wisconsin. Do you sort of have a number in mind right away? I mean, how much of a statistical deep dive do you take to make that adjustment?
Now, with the Vegas Stats and Information Network, I do a publication along with Wes Reynolds, who I know has joined this podcast quite a bit. We both do the look-ahead lines for just the college basketball games in general. Look-ahead line for VSIN's Point Spread Weekly was Wisconsin catching about 3.5 to 4 points, and I thought that was a pretty good line. I personally thought that Wisconsin had a good chance to be able to win the game outright. Now, with these two guys in the fold, I go from Wisconsin maybe being a little bit up against it. Maybe they should be only catching 1 to 2 points. Now I have to expand it to more like 6 or 7. Now, the Kohl Center is a tremendous home court environment. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, but we've seen in recent years Wisconsin lose on their home floor to Northwestern. I remember the way that they began the year a few years ago against Western Illinois. They wind up losing to the Fighting Illini earlier this year. That's something that I need to take into account as well because it seems like the luster and the mystique of the Kohl Center is starting to wear off a little bit. And now that you've got 2 losses, it makes things very difficult. And you almost have to downgrade a little bit of everything in general with Wisconsin.
So another game here on Saturday, and again, a lot of times these mid and low major games get overshadowed by some of the major conference games that are out there. But I love a game like this. I love talking about games like this here on the show. UNC Greensboro and East Tennessee State down in the SoCon. Two very, very good basketball teams here. Looks like East Tennessee State will be a home favorite in this one, but we're starting to get to that point now in conference play where you're getting rematches, and ETSU went on the road, beat Greensboro 64-57 back on January 8th. How much does that, road revenge factor come into play for you when you're handicapping a game?
It depends game by game because there are some games that you have bigger rivalries than other, and I think that the margin of defeat has to go into it as well. The revenge I look at the least is probably like sort of a 12-point game. The team was trailing by 20 the entire way through, and then they get a couple garbage buckets to be able to cut it to 12, something like that. I might award a little bit less than if it was just an absolute heartbreaker in which UNC Greensboro wins on a buzzer three and everything like that. But with East Tennessee State, what you do want to note is that in this game, they're going to be once again without Jeremy Rodriguez. He's been the team's top rebounder so far this year. That means that they're going to be a little bit weaker down low. With UNC Greensboro, we're really seeing the rise of so many guys like a James Dickey, a Kyron Galloway. They do a solid job down low. And Isaiah Miller has been shooting much better than when these teams faced off the first time as well. So those are all things that you need to take into account. And you have to take into account, I guess you could call it just recency as well, how these teams are playing their last couple of games. East Tennessee State, they're coming off a bad loss against Mercer. Ever since that game against UNC Greensboro, they had been rolling, but they wind up having a little bit of a doldrum there. Meanwhile, to UNC Greensboro, this is a bunch that they're coming off a nice win against Western Carolina. They pounded them into submission. Western Carolina and Sanford, two of the quicker teams that you're going to find out there in the SoCon. They held both those teams at 63 points or fewer. So this is a UNC Greensboro team that I think is going to be able to get their tempo. I don't know if they're going to be able to win the game outright on the road, but you know that these guys are going to be out for revenge. And you know that this is a team that really has it dialed in on the defensive portion of things.
What are you looking for from the first meeting to carry over to the second meeting? I mean, obviously, you do want to take that game into consideration. It's not the be-all, end-all, obviously. And, we do see some line adjustments based on that first matchup. But, what do you try to take away from that first game? I mean, does it matter in the handicap for the second game?
I think what's big is the fact that East Tennessee State was able to dominate with regards to free throws in that first game. 26 of 33. Now, I will say UNC Greensboro, typically not a great free throw shooting team to begin with. Their star player, Isaiah Miller, shoots under 60% at the free throw line, but they went 10 of 17 in that game. They got decimated on the glass, 38-29. And for UNC Greensboro, you got to think that this is going to turn a little bit more in their favor. You got to think that they're going to try to play a little bit more disciplined. And for East Tennessee State, who's really the star player that's able to step up for this team? Bo Hodges does a good job for this bunch. He's able to give the team over 10 points per game. Isaiah Tillsdale is able to flow things as well. But with UNC Greensboro, you have a clear alpha dog player in Isaiah Miller. He had 24 points the first time these two teams matched up. You got to think that with East Tennessee State, they're going to be keying in on him a little bit more. And that means that the ancillary guys, I think, are going to get a couple more open looks, and that will help them out in this game as well.
Well, and that's an important thing. You got to look back at that first meeting and try to understand why something happened the way it did. Like you said, there was a free throw disparity in that first game. There was a big rebounding edge. Sometimes it's going to be a team went 3 for 26 from three, and that's why they lost the game. And you would expect the second time around that maybe there'd be some regression to the mean there. So I think you can use that first meeting to your advantage. You don't want to over-evaluate what it means, but obviously it is part of the handicapping process.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. You have to take a look at the last meeting and don't just completely use it as, they were both held below 65 points in that one. It's going to be below 65 points once again. But at the same time, you need to take some notes from that one. See, okay, how do I think UNC Greensboro is going to adjust? How do I think East Tennessee State is going to adjust? And then you have to just factor in there just how tough it is to beat a team twice or more in a season as well. Those are all factors that you have to put in there. You can't just look at one or two things. You have to try to just take as many things as humanly possible, put it in a blender, and that will shoot out how you're going to play this game.
All right, one more game I want to touch on here with you on Saturday, and this one is deep, deep, deep under the radar. The Southland Conference, the two best teams in that league coming together here this weekend. Stephen F. Austin takes on Sam Houston State. Stephen F. Austin, number 1 in the country in turnover percentage on defense, but as you would expect here with Southland teams, they've both played very, very weak schedules. So how do you handicap this type of situation where you're actually playing somebody, on each other's level?
Yeah, I do like what the Jacks have been able to do so far this year. And with Sam Houston State, they were close but no cigar at a big win on the road against Mississippi State as well. They were leading that game by double digits. They wound up not being able to finish. And what you want to note is that both these teams are very similar in that they both do a great job of being able to generate turnovers. And both these teams have a star player that's able to take over a game. Kayvon Harris for Stephen F. Austin is able to give the team right around 18 points, shoots a high 30s from three-point range. And then you've got Zach Natal, who's been doing a great job for Sam Houston State as well, give the team right around 14 points. But what I think you have to take a look at in this game is just the sheer depth with Stephen F. Austin. They've got so many guys like John Comau that just gives the team 3 assists. He chips in there a couple steals per game, one of the best with regards to being able to generate steals as well. So that is something that you do want to note. And with the Sam Houston State bunch, they certainly have a bunch of guys that they know their role. They do a solid job of it. But I just feel like Stephen F. Austin is a little bit more of a complete team at this point. And what you do have to know as well is that these two teams, time and time again, have met for the Southland title. Now, I know that Sam Houston State and Stephen F. Austin both had a couple down years recently. Stephen F. Austin last year was a bad year. Before that, they had been a juggernaut in the conference. So Sam Houston State probably going to be using that as a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, as the entire Southland does in general against Stephen F. Austin. But I think that the talent here might be a little bit too great for Stephen F. Austin. How I'm going to play this game, though, it really depends on the numbers, because as I've said on your fine show, you're not betting teams, you're betting numbers.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, is Stephen F. Austin a road favorite here in your mind?
They probably are a little bit of a road favorite, but if they're like laying something ridiculous, because we've seen Stephen F. Austin be a double-digit road favorite in a lot of these games. I certainly don't think that that's going to be the case here, but if they wind up opening up like maybe a 1, even 2 possession favorite, I'd be looking a little bit more at Stephen F. Austin because they do a solid job of being able to hit their free throws. But if you're really getting up past that 2 possession point, that's when you really got to be taking a look at Sam Houston State. I don't know if it's going to get quite that far, but if it would, I would certainly think that there'd be a lot of value on the Bearcats.
Again, obviously, lots of good games on Saturday, but never a bad thing to take a look at some of those low majors out there. I know you love the added games. And look, let's be totally honest here, and this will be the point that we'll finish up on. There's more value in these low and mid-major conferences than there are in playing the major conferences that everybody knows about. So if you're looking for some value on one of these big Saturday 140-game cards, you're probably going to find it more in games like this as opposed to, the Dukes and Michigan States of the world.
Oh, totally agree with you. The bookmakers are going to be spending night and day looking at how to handicap Wisconsin as they're going to be playing host to Michigan State with all this news, because they know that there's going to be a lot of people betting this game. Meanwhile, they're probably not evaluating Sacred Heart, who was in action on Thursday, and how they're performing without their point guard Cameron Parker, who's out for the year. They're much less likely to be sitting there like, all right, we need to spend the next 12 hours adjusting our handicap on this Sacred Heart team, because you know what? We're going to get like 5 wagers of $5 on it, and some schmuck named Greg Peterson will probably walk in and he'll probably lay some money on the under or something like that. I mean, it's one of these things where the bookmakers are really looking at those power conference teams. They are looking at these marquee big bomber matchups. And then when you get something out there with like New Mexico State, Chicago State, who's been a great fade, all these teams out there in the WAC, they're much less likely to be concerned about taking a little bit of a loss there as long as they're winning big on like these ACC, Big 10, Big 12 games.
Well, as we talked about, it's going to be a very big and busy weekend for you, Greg. Every weekend is big and busy for you, but people can hear you on your Hoopin' with Hoops podcast covering all things college basketball, and you're also on VSIN, and like we said, covering the Super Bowl here out in Iowa. So what's the best way for people to find you, Greg?
The hub for everything is my Twitter feed at @Junior_D1, and then you can find the Hoopin' with Hoops podcast, which, despite the fact that I'm doing all these live hits and everything like that, still going to be every single day. And you can find that on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. I break down every college basketball game, every side, every total, every single day. It all comes with analysis, all comes with the exact in-depth coverage that I was just giving you on this podcast. And then with VSIN, that is SiriusXM channel 204, you're able to catch us on a variety of different platforms with regards to like Sling TV, Fubo TV. And like I said, it's going to be just sporadic reports from Iowa all throughout Sunday, just taking a look at the handle that they're getting out there. Probably going to be a bunch of screaming Chiefs fans and everything like that. So it is going to be absolutely tremendous.
Well, make sure you follow Greg on Twitter, once again, at @GUnit_81. Check him out on VSiN here, in particular this weekend while he's out in Iowa. And, of course, that Hoopin' with Hoops podcast is absolutely outstanding. Greg, always a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for joining me. Have fun this weekend, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Absolutely. Great to be on with you, Adam. Thank you.